Is your child bored in school? Do they ask you a million questions over and over and over again? Do they fixate on one subject and then dive really deep into that and have everything about that one subject for months at a time? Or maybe they just don't like those tags around their neck and the clothes. Any of that is actually could be a sign of giftedness. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome, Impactful Parents. It's Question and Answer Thursday, and every Thursday I come on and do a little live right here where you can ask me a question and I'm going to answer it. So if you would like to ask a question for me for next week, please do. You can direct message me on social media, or you can email me at theimpactfulparent@gmail.com. Now let's talk about giftedness. I have a special place in my heart for gifted children, and yet it is very, very misunderstood by a lot of the population. So, first of all, gifted and talented, what the heck is that? Well, basically, it's really simple. It just means that your child has academic or creative abilities a little bit more so than the normal child. Now, I'm going to do a quick debunk of some myths about gifted children. First one is actually might surprise you. I've worked in gifted education for quite many years now, and you would be surprised that actually most gifted children that I find, at least personally, don't actually like to be labeled as gifted. They don't like the label. They understand that they might be learning a little bit differently and their brain is wired a little bit differently, and they could be proud of that. But the label of gifted, it's a lot of pressure. So maybe you didn't know that about gifted kids. Second, gifted kids do need some type of special education in order to reach their full potential. I think that one of the myths I'd like to debunk is, oh, those gifted kids, they're fine. They're going to be okay. And a lot of times they don't get the help because they are super smart and they can do things on their own and they're going to be fine. So they don't get the extra attention that they may need. Well, what ends up happening is that those kids end up getting bored and then they get in trouble in school because they're bored in the classroom and they start to act out and maybe they start to not even care anymore. So if you have a child that's actually seems lazy or doesn't seem to be really engaged in school, I know we want to go straight to, as parents, problem child and label that and try to figure it out. But it actually, I would like to bring awareness that it could be that your child might be gifted, and you could look at some of these things that I'm going to be giving you today and see if maybe that is the reason why your child is not engaged in school. They are understimulated. It's very, very, very common. Another myth I'd like to debunk is that gifted children are only found in a more resourceful places. Okay, so what I mean by that is a lot of times most gifted kids are found in places that have really good resources or high economy. And that's because they have been identified. So giftedness is across all cultures, across everywhere in the entire world, in every single country, in all ethnicities. It's just that in some places, it does not get recognized because they don't have the resources to identify it. So that's what ends up happening. But it is universal across the world. Another thing that a lot about giftedness is that sometimes people think that if you're gifted, you must be so smart and smart in everything. And that is completely not true. Some people could be very, very gifted in all areas, but majority of people are not. They are actually gifted in one particular area and could actually even have a learning difference or a learning challenge in another area. So although your child might be, let's say, dyslexic or have dysgraphia or have autism or be autistic, then it does not necessarily mean that they are not gifted. They could be very, very gifted still and still have these learning challenges. And then lastly, going back to that, hey, my kid is failing in school. They cannot possibly be gifted. And again, very, very common that if it's not diagnosed pretty early that your child could be gifted, they could just be extremely understimulated and not care anymore about education and therefore not do very well in school. So just because your child is not doing well does not mean that they are not gifted. So let's talk a little bit about what those kind of things are that could present giftedness. Now, I'm just going to give you a free PDF today that's going to have a checklist of some of the more common traits of gifted people. And this is going to surprise you. It may not be what you think. So if you go to theimpactfulparent.com/gifted, you're going to get this free checklist. And if you can check off a few of those things on the list, all I'm saying, parents, is that it might be worth your time to look into seeing if your child is gifted, which is going to be requiring some testing, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So it is a possibility, and I want you to be aware. So what are some of those things that gifted people have that maybe some of us don't, who are more on the normal realm? Well, gifted people tend to have really like an excellent memory about things. They just remember things a lot, very easily. They learn quickly. They might have a large vocabulary. I see that a lot of gifted kids use complex sentences for their age or their grade level. They have an advanced sense of comprehension. So this is where gifted education really comes in handy, is that when they have this advanced comprehension, gifted people, in order to be stimulated, have to do like a little bit higher order thinking. And so that's where gifted education really comes into play, and different than maybe some of your mainstream education, is that the gifted education is going to give them the opportunity to be a lot more creative. It's going to be a lot more higher level thinking, a lot more discovery, a lot more investigating, coming to analysis and conclusions and all those things that they may not get in a mainstream classroom, or they do get in a mainstream classroom, but just not enough of it because their brain needs a little bit more of this other abstract kind of thinking. So that advanced comprehension is really, really common. Now, if your child has self-taught themselves something, maybe they self-taught themselves how to read, or maybe even write as a very, very young child, maybe as a preschooler even, that could be a sign of giftedness. Sometimes gifted kids have a high intensity of emotions and high sensitivities, not only with their emotions, like they just cry at the drop of the hat, maybe it feels like, you say something and they're just like really sensitive about it, but also, like I said in the introduction, maybe with their clothes, they have a little bit of sensory processing disorder is what it's called. And so the tags bug them, loud noises, erupt sounds, really bright lights. Those are all lean to some giftedness, actually. So not necessarily, but it could be a sign. These people like to think in the abstract, in the complex. They're very logical. And what I find is that in the early years, I would say about fourth grade and under, they have a high sense of justice. And that means that these kids like to have things fair and even, and they're really passionate about that. So there's another thing. They have intense concentration about particular subjects that are really, really interesting to them. You'll find that with young children, especially, they get into one thing, like let's say space or dinosaurs, and they roll with that for months at a time, and they dive deep into it. They want to know everything about space and dinosaurs, and you got to take them different places to stimulate them with that kind of knowledge, and they want to be the dinosaur, and they want to learn everything they can about it. That's the kind of thing you could see in a gifted kid. They're going to ask you lots and lots of questions. This is the kid that's like, why to you all the time. Possible gifted kids, because they just want to know. Let's see. They have a highly developed sense of curiosity. They like to make connections between concepts. And this is really, really key, especially if it's connections that you're like, wow, for your age, that's an amazing connection you just made from one subject to another. That is a good sign. And again, why gifted education can really foster and develop that and help your child get to their full potential. One of the things that I find in gifted children is that they have an unusual or very keen sense of humor. So to their peers, they may not be funny at all because their humor is actually much more adult-like. So we as adults will laugh at them. And in fact, they may speak like an adult. And you may feel like you can have this conversation with this child and you're like, wow, this is amazing. I'm having this conversation. It's a little misleading because social emotionally, they are still a child, but what's coming out of their mouth seems so mature, it'll take you back. Happens all the time with gifted kids. They like to have a really vivid imagination about things, especially when they're younger, but throughout their whole life, they just can envision stuff, see beyond concepts to the bigger picture a lot of times. All those could be a sign of giftedness. Now, again, this list is going to be, it's absolutely free at theimpactfulparent.com/gifted. Now, let's talk a little bit about if you can download the PDF and you start checking things off and you're like, wait a second, this does sound like my kid. What do you do next? Well, you should probably have your child tested. And in order to do that, you would go to a psychologist. And the psychologist is going to do a battery of tests with them. And there are two main types of tests that they're going to do. The first is an achievement test. And that's going to be if they're kind of checking in a very simplistic way. I'm saying this because it's actually a lot more complex, but a simple way to say is the achievement test is seeing if your child is advanced for their grade level. And the ability test is the second kind of test that they're going to administer. And that's more of the IQ test. And it does get a lot more deeper than that, but basically go get your child tested and they can give you an idea of whether or not they are gifted. From there are gifted specialists out there that you can go get help with. There are gifted programs. There are schools that are specifically for gifted children. And again, those really foster the learning the way your child needs in order to be stimulated, to continue to captivate their interest in school and math and science and all these things. And those teachers are specially trained. So it can be a huge asset to you if you have a gifted child and you put them into an actually gifted education environment. I highly, highly suggest that. Now, the public schools do have breakout classes for children that are gifted. Those can be sufficient also, but it all depends on your school district and how good the program is. So depending on where you are, inquire about it and see if it's stimulating your child enough. And again, I bring this up today because so many times parents come to me and they'll say like, my child is just not doing well in school. They're unmotivated. They seem lazy and they just don't want to do their work. And I think that the common mistake we make is we go straight to they're just misbehaving and why are they doing that? And there's trouble there. When really another option could be that they're just very understimulated and need a different type of learning environment in order to really flourish and love and cultivate learning in the way that they need for their brain. So there's so many reasons out there that this could be an avenue that you should pursue. Just throwing it out there for you parents, it could be what your child needs. And if you have a question for me for next week, please submit it. Direct message me, email me at theimpactfulparent@gmail.com. And until next time, you got this. I'm just here to help.